The morning air was heavy with sorrow in the small town of Nain. Its narrow streets, lined with modest homes, were unusually quiet, save for the soft murmurs of neighbors gathering to pay their respects. In the center of the town, a young widow stood by her son's lifeless body, now wrapped in linen and placed on a wooden bier. Her face was pale and tear-streaked, her grief so profound that it seemed to echo in the very stones beneath her feet. The townspeople, familiar with her struggles, exchanged solemn glances. With her husband long gone and now her only son dead, the widow faced a bleak and uncertain future. The mourners, dressed in garments of mourning, began their procession. Flute players played mournful melodies, and professional wailers added their cries to the somber scene. The widow walked behind the bier, her head bowed, her steps slow and heavy. As the procession reached the town gate, Jesus and his disciples approached from the opposite direction, their sandals stirring the dust of the road. The crowd following Jesus fell silent as they took in the sight before them, a grieving mother, a lifeless son, and a town steeped in sorrow. Jesus' gaze fell upon the widow. Her hunched shoulders and tear-filled eyes told him everything. Compassion welled up within him, a deep and divine sorrow for her loss and the hopelessness she faced. Without hesitation, Jesus moved toward the procession, his presence commanding attention. The flute players ceased their melody, and the mourners fell quiet, watching in silence. Jesus stepped directly in front of the bier and raised his hand to stop the bearers. The entire procession halted, the air thick with anticipation. The widow, startled, looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes meeting his gaze. "Do not weep," Jesus said softly, his voice gentle yet filled with authority. His words were unexpected, almost audacious. Who could tell a grieving mother not to cry? Then, turning his attention to the bier, Jesus reached out and placed his hand on the edge of the wooden frame. The crowd gasped, touching the bier risked ceremonial uncleanliness, yet Jesus acted without hesitation. "Young man," Jesus said, his voice steady and commanding, "I say to you, arise." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The crowd held their breath, their eyes fixed on the lifeless form. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the young man stirred. His chest rose as he drew in a deep breath, and his eyes fluttered open. He sat up on the bier, his face alive with confusion and wonder. He spoke, his voice strong and clear, and the crowd erupted in cries of shock and joy. The bearers, stunned, gently lowered the bier to the ground. The widow gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as her knees buckled beneath her. She scrambled to her son's side, wrapping her arms around him, her sobs now those of joy and relief. "Mother," the young man said, his voice tender. She cupped his face in her hands, her tears falling freely. "You are alive," she whispered, her gratitude spilling out as she turned to Jesus. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling. Jesus' expression was calm, a small, reassuring smile on his face. The crowd, still reeling from what they had witnessed, began to praise God loudly. "A great prophet has appeared among us," one man shouted. Another added, "God has come to help his people." Jesus, ever humble, stood quietly as the crowd swirled around him, their voices filled with awe and reverence. The disciples exchanged looks, their own faith strengthened by yet another demonstration of their master's power. As the widow embraced her son and the crowd continued to marvel, Jesus and his disciples quietly made their way out of the town. He left behind a village transformed, a family reunited, and a profound testimony to God's compassion and power. The widow, now filled with hope, watched Jesus disappear into the distance. She held her son close, her heart overflowing with gratitude for the man who had not only restored her son to life but had also given her a future.